Memories of a little girl of 9 years old. It was a hot August. I had spent that summer in a Caucasian village of Mayas with my grandmother and had a wonderful holiday where I had the best experiences of my life. So much so that I couldn't even remember the metropolitan city where I was born. I was under the spell of green and free nature and my soul was never bored. The only thing I missed was my storybooks that made it easier for me to dream by looking at the pictures. But the time for schools to start was approaching, and I had to go back to Izmir for some preliminary preparations. My grandmother was the one I loved the most among my ancestors and the one I resembled the most, perhaps because I was the first of her approximately 45 grandchildren to come to the world in many years. She also made me feel special. The strong and different bond between us had to be cut off for a while with a return, and finally the journey had begun. The Scout village, which was established in a green forest area with an altitude of up to 2,000 meters, was much more difficult and challenging to reach 40 years ago than Heide and his grandfather, who lived in the Swiss Alps, going to the city to go to Clara. However, since I had linked myself to Heidi in my imagination, I was not going to be bothered by any misfortune we would experience until we landed in Balıkesir. On the contrary, I was going to try to be as positive as her. We both had joined hands and walked for a long time among the green plane trees, hornbeam trees, oak trees, and fragrant linden trees until we had come to another named village whose name I didn't know. We would take a small minibus from there to reach Balıkesir train station and board our main vehicle there. The vehicle was filled in a very short time and we were on our way. My long and braided hair was eye-catching, and I was wanted to be loved by some old ladies as a city dweller granddaughter. My grandmother wasn't hesitating to introduce me proudly and give me information about myself. I was about to get bored with all this attention when we arrived at our destination. In those years of deprivation, since there wasn't comfort and is like today, we had to wait a long time for the train we were going to take, and we had found a bench to sit on when the sun was slowly setting. Everywhere was so full that we had to sit where an old man was sitting. This gentleman, who probably passed away during this period, was 55 or 60 years old at the time, and he was speaking like a true Istanbul gentleman. He had a felt hat like my grandfather used to wear and a clean white shirt on. First, he had learned where we were going and wished me a good journey. Then, he had started talking to me. At that moment, he had handed me the tippy-tip gum in its yellow package, which I still remember even though 40 years had passed, and he had started talking to me wisely. Perhaps unaware that it would be the subject of an article many years later. When the time came and our train was approaching, we had parted ways and set off in different carriages. The carriage we sat in on the train coming from Istanbul was completely full, except for 2 seats. After sitting in our seats, we started to look around. I wanted to see what kind of people were traveling with us. My scanning, which I started from afar, was interrupted as I got closer by the gazes of a young teacher couple who were sitting right next to us and looked very good together, because they were the most interesting passengers in the carriage. Their loving gazes and their polite attitudes towards each other had caught my attention. At one point, we made eye contact with this young woman and she invited me to join them. Although shy, I had sat on her knee. She affectionately had stroked my hair and enthusiastically told me that she and her husband were teachers and that they had been assigned here. Both of them were trying to get to know me about where I studied and my interests. At one point, this noble young woman had taken a ready-made cake wrapper out of her bag and handed it to me. I guess she had taken in a different compassion with the spirit of teaching. After a while, I asked permission and thanked them and sat down in my own seat, but I could hear all the conversations that took place between them from their seats right next to mine. My belief that the skin, which I had witnessed in the first years of my life, was specific to all couples was unfortunately had shattered by my own marriage, which I was to enter into exactly 14 years later. How interesting it is that I had said I would never marry a person from Balıkesir and was tested with the opposite. And more interestingly, the first trip we met with him when we were engaged was from Balıkesir to Izmir. Just like that day when I was 9. It was a strange feeling to see that day that I had manifested without realizing it repeat itself years later. However, our trip was far from the skins that girl, who was very emotional even at the age of 9, watched with admiration in that couple. Maybe that is why a one-day trip is recommended to get to know someone, because it reveals many things. We had arrived at Bayraklı train station later in the evening, and after a tiring day, we were finally able to smell the strange Aydan-mixed smell of Izmir that bothered our noses in those years. Sometimes, the crowns of memories we thought we had forgotten the most tingle our noses with a soulful, nostalgic peace, and we live that day more intensely than before. I don't know why these lines, which I never dreamed of writing, came to my attention right now, but the song called Fikrimin İnce Gülü in my headphones has a big role in this. When I concentrate and close my eyes, I watched with astonishment as my mind takes me back to those years. I think the idea of setting off from Ankara to Izmir to see my grandmother, who is now very old, and on her deathbed for one last time was also very effective in this. Our souls live in so many details and crumbs without realizing it.